Dissolve in New York Harbor, dusk. Long shot of the harbor of New York, seen from the East River, just at dusk. After the introduction of music, we hear Marlowe's voice.
The old river, in its broad reach, rests unruffled at the decline of day. After ages of good service done to the races that people its banks, spread out in the tranquil dignity of a waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth.
Series of dissolves, showing the movement of traffic on the river. The ferry boats, brightly lit, hustling back and forth.
The traffic of the great city goes on in the deepening night upon the sleepless river. The tidal current turns to and fro in its unceasing surface, crowded with memories of men and ships it had borne to the rest of the home or to the battles of the sea, hunters for gold and pursuers of fame. What greatness is not floated on the ebb of that river into the mystery of an unknown earth, the dreams of men, the seed of commonwealths, the germs of empires.
A long shot of Manhattan Island, almost a silhouette against the twilight sky.
Further west, on the upper reaches, the place of the monstrous town marked ominously on the sky. A brooding gloom in the sunshine, a lurid glare under the stars.
As we move down the length of the island, snatches of sound and music, the beginnings of life of the city at night. In Central Park, snatches of jazz music from the radios and the moving taxicabs, the sweet dinner music in the restaurants at the big hotels further west, the throb of tom-toms foreshadow the jungle music of the story to come. The lament of brasses, the noodling of big orchestras, tuning up in concert halls and opera houses. Finally, as the camera finds its way downtown below Broadway, the music freezes into a forlorn expression of the empty shopping district of the deserted Battery, the mournful, muted clangor of the bellboys out at sea, and the hoot of shipping. The hurrying crowd of ships, large and small, in the river, and as we move out into the harbor, the luminous stretch of the sea reaches beyond. A little starship, dark on the harbor. A man can be seen leaning against its single mast. Close up of Marlowe in his boat, leaning against its mast. He's lighting his pipe. He throws away the match, takes a breath of smoke, leans back against the mast, and speaks. Behind him, Manhattan Island, its buildings lighting up in the deepening dusk.
And this also has been one of the darkest places on the earth. I was thinking of very old times, when our fathers first came here 400 years ago, the other day. Imagine the feelings of the skipper of a fine ship, a civilized man, 400 years ago, here at the very end of the world. Imagine the trip up this river with death skulking in the air, in the water, in the bush. They must have been dying like flies here 400 years ago. Land in a swamp, march through the woods, and in some inland post feel the savagery, the utter savagery, all that mysterious life of the wilderness that stirs in the forest, in the jungles, in the hearts of wild men. It has a fascination, too. The abomination, you know? Imagine the growing regrets, the longing to escape, the powerless disgust, the surrender, the hate. Maybe we shouldn't feel like that. I don't know. They were the conquerors, of course. The men who first sailed into this harbor. They grabbed what they could from the weak or the poor or what was to be got. It's not a pretty thing when you look into it too much. The conquest of the earth, which means mostly taking away from those who have a different complexion or slightly different shaped noses than ourselves. What tries to redeem it is the idea at the back of it. There was a man I once knew. I'd like to tell you about him. And about the girl, too. Well, the girl, I won't bother you too much with what happened to me personally. It's his story. But to understand everything, you ought to know how I got out there and what I saw and how I went up that river to the place where I first met the poor devil. I was over in Europe.
Marlowe relights his pipe. As the match flares, we dissolve. Shop window and street, day. Marlowe, lighting his pipe, is seen reflected in the shop window. He's still pulling at his pipe, the match flaring into the bowl. We see the bowl itself large in the front of the frame. The match lights a torch above it, but his voice, the voice of Marlowe on the boat. I was loafing around one of the big port towns looking for a ship when I saw that map in a shop window. Through Marlowe's reflection, through the glass of the shop window, a map of the dark country can be seen. I've always had a passion for maps. When I was a child, there were many blank spaces on the earth, and when I saw one that looked particularly inviting, I used to put my finger on it and say, when I grow up, I'll go there. Well, I'd seen most of the places, except one of them, the biggest, the most blank. Moves closer to the window in the map. The river in it, especially, comes sharply into prominence. There's a river in it, a big river. You can see it in the map. It looks like a snake, uncoiled with its head in the sea and its tail lost in the depths of the land. And as I looked at that map in that shop window, it fascinated me. As a snake would a bird, a silly little bird. His reflection in the window expressing the birth of an idea, perhaps even to the extent of finger snapping. He takes the pipe out of its mouth, and it turns away up the street. Pan from map and shop window across the brick wall to an empty business street in some Central European seaport town. A perspective of shop window and commercial houses at the end of the street, a great company building in the best Bismarck style. It is a cold, damp day in winter. A part of gold lettering on the front of the building can be seen, and there is a general impression, impersonal, magnificent, somewhat aged, but still capable of paying its bill. Then I remembered there was a big concern, a company for trade on that river, among other places, a continental company. Their offices were the biggest thing in town. Pan across the brick wall to the shop window again, registering the map, the river, and Marlowe's reflection. I thought to myself, they can't trade on that river without some kind of boat, steamboats. Well, I thought, why shouldn't I try and get charge of one? The snake had charmed me. Moves in toward the river on the map. Company building, day. Long shot of the building as we move towards it. Lobby and stairway, day. Crane shot starts moving up great flights of bleak stairs towards the frosted glass doors of the offices, and finally the desk of the secretary. I got my appointment. One of their captains had been killed in a scuffle with the natives. Corridor. Secretary's desk and doctor's office, day. Close-up of the secretary, then down to an insert of the document which the secretary is handing to Marlowe, and which, during the ensuing narration, Marlowe's hand is seen to sign. They made me sign a document. I believe I undertook, amongst other things, not to disclose any trade secrets. Well, I'm not going to. Pan up from the document to the bare gray walls of the hall at the head of the stairs, and hold on an impression of gloom and severity. It was just as though I'd been led into some kind of conspiracy. I mean, there was something not quite right. The whole place was as still as a house in the city of the dead. Mr. Marlowe, there's yet a visit to the doctor. A simple formality. Marlowe rises. The secretary also rises. Fills the frame, blocking out the hall behind him. The secretary backs away from the camera into the side door, indicating to the office. He is seen at the far end of the room. He moves rapidly towards the foreground until he fills the frame. He has a glass eye.
Good for there. Good for where you're going. You're going. Excuse me. Will you let me, please, measure your head? What for? Oh, thank you, sir. Excuse me. The doctor repeats business as before, bearing back from the far end of the room to some extraordinary essential prop for measuring human skulls. He extends the calipers towards the cameras like an enormous insect threatening its victim with its legs and antennae. I always ask leave, in the interests of science, to measure the crania of those going out there. And when they come back too?
The doctor hastily lowers his props.
Oh, no, I never see them.
He pushes his face closer into the camera, his one good eye darting appraisingly in every direction. The other glass one remains fixed.
Good. Nordic type. The superior aces. You know, very interesting, the effect. No. I never see them. Besides the changes that take place, you know, inside. So, you're going out there. Very interesting. Have you ever had any madness in your family?
Mother.
Is that a question in the interests of science, too? That would be interesting to watch the changes of individuals on the spot. Nordics, you know, the superior types, but...
The doctor starts to move away, but is stopped as Marlowe speaks.
Are you an alienist? My dear sir, every doctor should be a little... Excuse me.
He rushes back to the far end of the room with his calipers.
You see, sir, I have a little theory which you gentlemen who go out there must help me prove. Yes, you have to help me prove. This is my share of the advantages which the company shall reap from the interest in such a magnificent dependency, which my country shall reap when it regains its lost colonies. Yes, the mere wealth I leave to others. Pardon my questions, but you are the first American coming under my observation. Well, I'm not a bit typical. If I were, I wouldn't be talking to you like this. Would you say what you say is rather profound and probably erroneous? Yes. Avoid irritation more than exposure to the sun. Now, excuse me. Goodbye. In the tropics, one must, before everything, be calm. Keep calm. That is what I tell them all. Keep calm. Even Mr. Kurtz.
Long pause. Marlowe.
Kurtz?
Doctor.
Before everything.
Marlowe.
Who's he?
Doctor.
Keep Mr. Kurtz. Of course. You know, our next leader. I've never heard of him. Mr. Kurtz is a very great man, sir. He's in charge there, you know. Experience, and when we get back our colonies, a very great man, sir.
Stop at door, close to doctor's face. He peers into the lens.
Goodbye. Keep calm.
At the sound of the doctor's voice, camera pans around, looking up the staircase. Standing at the head of the stairs is the doctor. He's looking down at Marlowe, grinning. The door closing behind, Hold on the street. At the end of it can be seen the shop window containing the map of the dark country. Beyond that, docks and shipping and the sea.
You know, I'm used to clearing out for any port in the world with less thought than most men give to crossing a street. But now, I felt as though instead of going to the center of a continent, I were about to set off to the center of the earth.
Very slowly, across the image of the street and shipping activity in the distance, superimpose the vague silhouette of Marlowe leaning against the mast of his little boat. The street fades from the screen, leaving for a moment the simple outline of Marlowe. A series of dissolves of the moving coastline seen from the steamer. The first of these superimpose itself behind and against the above silhouette of Marlowe. His image is fading to a clear view of the moving coastline.
I left in a company steamer, and we called in every port along the way, places with the names like Grand Bassam, Little Popo, a tin shed and a flagpole in the wilderness, where the merry dance of death and trade goes on in a still and earthy atmosphere, overheated. like an overheated catacomb.
Shimmering, formless music, sustained and without melody or line. The lap dissolves, continues deliberately and rhythmically as the steamer continues its way down the coast toward the first station of the trading company.
And every day it looked the same, as though we hadn't moved. The edge of a colossal jungle that seemed to glisten and drip with steam. Watching a coast as it slips by your ship is like thinking about an enigma. I mean, there it is before you, frowning, smiling, inviting, grand, mean, insipid, savage, and always, always mute, with an air of whispering, "Come and find out." It was upwards of 30 days before I saw the mouth of the big river.
First station, as seen from bridge of the steamer, sailing toward it.
There's your station.
Camera pans over slightly to pick up his face as he leaps into the frame. He's standing beside Marlowe, leaning on the rail, looking out across the water.
And there's the river.
The long river, which winds away from the station and harbor to the right and is lost in the far-reaching jungle.
You're going up there?
Marlowe.
Yes. No. You're not English. Well, that's right. You belong to the company. Something to do with Mr. Kurtz, aren't you? You're not really interested in ivory. So, yes, it's funny what some men will do for a few dollars a month. Well, I guess I'll find out. Don't be too sure. I took a man here who hanged himself on the road. Why? Who knows? The sun was too much for him, maybe. Or the country. I'll send your things up, Mr. Marlowe. 4 boxes, did you say?
Pan over slowly to include Captain's face again.
So, farewell.
Long shot of the captain on the steamer bridge, seen from the wharf. The boat is docked, and the captain is still leaning on the rail, looking down at Marlowe, who has got off.
Mr. Marlowe!
At the sound of Stitzer's voice, pan away from the captain to Stitzer, Butz, and Strunz, all company men, their hands filled with documents and ledgers, standing in front of the warehouse.
That's right. My name is Ernst Stitzer. I have some authority here, but Mr. Blauer is the head of this station. The central
Company
station.
men keep crowding into each other in an effort to stay in Marlowe's focus.
Mr. Stitzer is his assistant, and I am under Mr. Stitzer. Oh, this is Mr. Klodvig Strunz. How do you do? Mr. Kurtz, of course, is all over us. He's not here at all, but he is up the river. But first, you must get the boat working.
As Marlowe looks across the river, he registers the broken-down riverboat in the distance on the opposite bank of the river.
Is that the boat? Yes, that's the boat. Very regrettable, of course. Nothing irregular, you understand. Oh, no, everything's very efficient, very well organized. But the boat, as you see... Yes, the boat, as you see. And no word from Mr. Kuntz. No word from Mr. Kurtz in these 3 months. And the young lady. You'll find your quarters up there on the hill, Mr. Marlowe. The men go back into the side, indicating the hill behind them and the settlement above. Strunz. Oh, Mr. Gallatin, the English representative, will direct you. Good day, Mr. Marlowe. Good day. Harbor and wharf day. Long shot from midway up the hill. Getting over that, Marlowe has completed part of his walk up the settlement and has turned back to look at the harbor. A native is heard singing a mournful lament. The company men have disappeared into the warehouse. One of them is seen standing in the doorway. Hill, path, and excavation day. Pan shot away from the harbor, past a broken cart, to a road leading up the hill. The native's mournful lament is still heard. Pat of the feet on the soft earth, and the jingle of chains announce before camera registers an approach of a chain gang of 30 natives, led by Strunz. The natives are carrying enormous stone drainage pipes. As this procession passes Marlowe, the company man straightens his rifle on his shoulder and grins in a nasty, familiar way. The procession continues, past on its way down the hill. Marlowe continues walking up toward the settlement. Hear the footsteps of the natives and the clank of their chains facing them behind us. The lament of the single native is louder. Close shot of a broken down cart by an excavation. And there's this big, ridiculous hole in the face of the mud bank. And in it, frying in the sun, there's about 35 dying savages and a lot of broken drain pipes. The natives have crawled into the pipes to escape the punishing sun. The whole picture is one of terrible desolation and despair. And Marlowe looks down to the singer, who is one of this number, and who's lying a little close to the edge. Close up, Negro face, the eyes staring into the lens. Then camera pans away and away past the tool shed toward the river and jungle as Marlowe turns to look at it. And the sorrowful voice of the singer can still be heard. Continuation of pan back up the hill to the long shot of the settlement. Registering again the reed fence of the compound. Within the fence is a group of corrugated iron buildings, a row to the left, a row to the right. Marlowe starts moving forward toward the fence opening. The voice of the singer is fading behind. Sound of the native's voice blends gradually into the tinkle of a piano, which comes from the dining hall. And we see this young girl come out of the last building on the left, and she comes closer and closer. We see that she is very beautiful. There's a look of recognition on her face. Both stop. She fills the frame directly. And there's this look of recognition on her as the face fades and changes to one of slight embarrassment.
Elsa, I'm sorry.
She moves out of the frame. Marlowe turns to watch her. Through the opening, glimpse of sky and sea, and in the distance, the camera picks up Elsa's retreating figure. She walks out of the gate, turns to the night, and disappears down the hill. Piano music, dining hall, late day. Piano music over the door is a curtain of mosquito netting, but it's fastened back to permit free movement. Truck slowly toward and through the door, and we achieve the interior of a dining room, which is combined dining room and club room for the company man. To the rear is a large round dining table with a dozen chairs around it, and in front a small table with a few chairs and a little upright piano against the wall, and an open electric bulb hangs from the ceiling. Beside the door is a picture of justice, painted by Kurtz. Eddie is in full occupation with champagne bottles and a fire bucket near him. He sits at the piano playing listlessly. Move to the center of the room, hold back his shadow. The shadow of Marlowe standing appears on the wall.
Eddie continues playing and speaks without turning.
Steamer got in yet? Da-dee-da-da-da-da-dee-da. Oh, how's the new river pilot?
By about the word river, he sees Marlowe and registers him for what he is.
Oh, hello. You gave me a start. You're it, aren't you? Pilot for the riverboat. My name's Marlowe. Oh, mine's Edward Lance Garriton. How do you do? I say, you aren't. I mean, you're American, aren't you? Good luck. I'm what's known as the English representative. About the same job as the keeper of an automatic lighthouse, but lonelier.
As Marlowe sits down, his shadow on the wall likewise assumes a sitting position. Eddie gets up, indicating. Marlowe watches him as he goes over to the fire bucket on the floor, where he keeps the champagne.
Where's your luggage? Oh, they're sending it up. Huh. They're probably all busy searching it. Searching it?
Eddie lifts the champagne bottle out of the bucket. He holds it toward Marlowe.
Medical comforts? No thanks. Bribery? Shh. Don't know what for. So's the piano. My job is to keep my eyes open, and theirs is to keep my mouth shut.
Marlowe.
Why should they search my luggage? What are they looking for? Oh, seditious literature, inflammatory pamphlets from the corrupt democracies. You know, I don't know, something radical like the Declaration of Independence. Books to burn. What are your politics, Marlowe? Well, I have no sympathies one way or the other. I'm just here to run a boat. You're an American. You believe in free speech and the equality of man. If you don't, you will when you get out of here. These boys will drive you to it.
There is a sound of an explosion. It shakes the building.
They're blasting. I don't know what for.
Another explosion. It knocks a picture down from the wall onto the floor.
Oh, they
Marlowe
can't
picks
do
up
a
the picture.
thing without Kurtz. Not a thing. Oh, that's his picture, by the way.
Marlowe's still staring at it.
It's a painting of justice or something.
Eddie's hand enters scene and takes the picture out of Marlowe's hand. Marlowe's hand drops out of the shot. Eddie, holding a glass of champagne in the one hand and the picture in the other, comes into view as he walks toward the wall and hangs the picture up.
Kurtz! He must be a wonderful man.
Eddie,
Oh, yes, he must be, if he's still alive.
Sound of an explosion.
Oh, shut up out there! Sorry, Marlowe. It's the tropics, dear old boy. Besides, you get fed up with all that manifest destiny. They'd like to own the country, I guess. It's ours, you know, England's. That's why I'm here, to keep my eyes open. Never can tell, you know, when they might take a plebiscite among the cannibals. It also explains the presence of a celebrity like Mr. Kurtz.
Eddie starts to sing what he's playing. There's another explosion, and Eddie sings louder.
Garrett,
Eddie stops singing and half turns his head to Marlowe.
there's a girl here in the station.
After the word girl, Eddie has stopped playing.
You mean Elsa?
He starts to play again, very softly.
I don't know her name. There's only one girl.
Eddie goes on playing.
Well, she came up to me as though she knew me. She's very beautiful. Who is she?
Eddie turns his head to look toward the door. Marlowe follows his look. Elsa's standing there. She walks toward Marlowe. Marlowe rises.
Miss Gruner! Mr. Marlowe.
Elsa is looking at Marlowe.
Oh, don't get up, Eddie. Go on playing. It's astonishing. You must excuse me again, Mr. Marlowe. I can't help remarking a certain resemblance. Oh, don't you see it, Eddie? Don't you see it? Oh, but of course you don't know him.
Eddie plays on.
I know Mr. Marlowe. Oh, dear, doesn't remind me of anybody around here, thank God. Pretty obvious way of getting acquainted, I must say.
Elsa laughs and goes over to Eddie sitting at the piano, his back to us. Looking over his shoulder at her, Marlowe's shadow on the wall. Elsa rumples Eddie's hair a little as she passes him, going around to the other side of the piano so that she can see his face as he plays.
Elsa.
Remember the first day I was here? You claimed to have met me in Florence. I claim to have seen you in Venice. We stopped at the same hotel.
Elsa.
What hotel? The Palazzo Grande. You and the royal suite. I was somebody's guest.
Elsa.
That's too easy.
Eddie.
You were closely guarded, I remember, by a gargoyle with blue hair.
Elsa.
It isn't blue exactly. A crowned head, whatever the color.
Eddie has now plunged into a catchy, popular tune of a couple of years ago. Elsa moves forward and sits down at the table across from Marlowe. Close shot of Eddie, still at the piano. Elsa is looking at Marlowe.
What'd she say to all that?
Elsa.
The old countess, your mother, dear girl. Grandmother. Besides, she isn't a countess. Well, I mean to say, 2 months in a tin shed with bed service and a... Eddie.
Eddie stops. The camera pans away from Eddie and centers on Elsa.
You
as
weren't
Marlowe
lying.
looks up at her.
I hate lies. Don't you, Marlowe? Yes, I do. I can't forgive a lie. Eddie, you were in Venice. I danced to that tune.
Eddie.
Everybody danced to that.
Elsa.
The Excelsior. Did you go there? Well, everybody went there. And martinis? Everybody. Everybody? I suppose so. You too, Mr. Marlowe? Afraid not. I spent most of my time in places like this, you know, the ends of the earth, the odds and ends. Ship me somewhere east of Suez where the best is like the worst, where there ain't no 10 commandments and a man can raise a thirst. Have you seen the new pilot? He's in here.
The sound of Stitzer's voice attracts Marlowe's attention. Pan from the Eddie at the piano to the door. Ernest Stitzer, assistant to the station manager, and Adalbert Melchers, bureaucrat number 4, have entered.
You find anything in his luggage? Mr. Marlowe's waiting for his things. You boys making a survey of his neckties? Mr. Marlowe, the manager of the station, oh, the manager no less, the manager of the station, Mr. Blower, will see you now, Mr. Marlowe. He is waiting in his office. Seen your boat, Captain? Ah, from a distance. It's better that way. It's got everything you could wish for, but a bottom. The manager tore that out of her last week. Come, Melchers. The boys got restless and decided not to wait for you. They were going to rescue Kurtz, so they took your boat, went over to the south back, ran it on the rocks. Very simple.
On the word simple, there is a sound of a distant explosion. The building shakes.
Bombs! Bombs! Marlowe's an anarchist. He's blown up the manager.
A loud pop. Eddie, grinning, holds up a newly opened champagne bottle. Melchers stares at it. Sound of another explosion.
That's the new drain system. It's dynamite.
Melchers hurries to the door and out into the road.
The new drain system. Everything's new here. Everything's system. The manager is waiting, Mr. Marlowe.
Marlowe rises. Continuation of pan across wall to doorway.
You haven't met Mr. Blower, our good manager. Yes, this is his dining hall. The other agents are always fighting about precedence at dinner. So he made the table round. Where he sits is the first place. The rest is nowhere. Except for that, he isn't very bright and he doesn't get sick. The rest of us do, and the rest of us will eventually go home or drop dead. But not the manager. His one talent is his ability to stay alive.
At this, Marlowe hears behind him the sound of a high-pitched yammering in native dialect. He turns to take in doorway and the road outside. In the road, a small crowd of company men is gathered around a very frightened-looking native. The native chatters and is shut up by a look from Strunz.
Strunz. He broke an iron wheel.
Elsa comes into the frame. She moves down the steps and into the roadway.
By accident? Carbs, ask if it was by accident.
Carbs comes into picture from camera left, walking up to native and joining in conversation. During this and over conversation in native dialect by Carbs. The others speak.
What kind of wheel? A locomotive wheel. The railroad's been abandoned. Rusted, says Elsa. The home country needs the scrap iron. Then who cares if the wheel's broken? Strunz. The manager is waiting, Mr. Marlowe. It was a new locomotive wheel. What in heaven are you bringing locomotive's wheel here for now? Mr. Kurtz ordered it. A very regrettable mistake. He says it was too heavy for him. Then he couldn't help it. It's the principle, Miss Gruner. Principle? The principle. We've had trouble with this one before. They must be made an example. I absolutely forbid you to beat this boy for dropping something useless that was too big for him. I shall have to make a report out. Well, go and make it. But don't touch that boy.
Stitzer has stepped up on the steps of manager's building. He calls across to Marlowe.
Mr. Marlowe, the manager is waiting in his office.
Pan from Grubben roadway across well to manager's building where Stitzer is waiting for Marlowe. A light glares through the doorway. We hear the groans of the dying men, mingled with the sound of the generator working in the harbor below. The steamer at the dock is feverishly loading ivory. Its funnels smoking black. Lights go on by the loading cranes. The generator is loud in the night. Pan across wall of building to doorway, where Stitzer is waiting for Marlowe to enter. We hear another sound over the generator, groans of the dying man. Eddie has begun to play again.
Slave's voice. Mr. Marlowe.
Marlowe goes through the door, past Stitzer. The light in the room is harsh, blinding.
Stitzer, look out!
Marlowe stops suddenly. At his feet, on a mattress, is the dying man. His face is wet with sweat. He looks up at Marlowe.
Mr. Brandenburg. Mr. Marlowe. Hello.
Brandenburg just looks.
Right there.
Blauer is seated behind a desk in the far corner of the room, very busy, filling out some report. The sound of his busy pen as we approach him. Behind him are two windows. One in the left wall looks out into the fence. The other on the right wall gives us a view of the wrecked boat on the far bank of the river. Brandenburg is heard to groan. Blauer stops writing at this, but does not look up.
Close the door, will you, Mr. Switzer?
Stitzer.
Yes, Mr. Blauer.
Marlowe hears the door close behind him.
The groans
Mr.
of the
Blauer
dying man
is
make
waiting,
it difficult to
motionless.
work.
Now he
Still,
begins again,
without
scratching
looking up.
deliberate patterns across the paper. Suddenly, he looks up.
A man who comes out here should have no entrails. Mr. Marlowe, you've been long coming. The situation is serious. The upriver stations must be relieved. There have been already so many delays, and we do not know who is dead and who is alive.
Mr. Blauer has put his report in an envelope and has picked up a stick of sealing wax. On the word alive, it breaks in his fingers. This appears to confound him absolutely. He stares at it for a while.
Yes, and we cannot think what has happened to Mr. Kurtz. He was warned. We were all warned. And him. Yes, Stitzer? Oh, yes, we were all warned, Mr. Marlowe, but...
Blauer darts a quick look at Stitzer, then fixes eyes on Marlowe. But somewhere beyond Marlowe's eyes.
Mr. Marlowe knows this company is actually controlled by our government. It occupies, in an English protectorate, a curious and delicate position. We recognize the importance of Mr. Kurtz to our government, too. If it was not for us to stand against, it is not for us to stand against his wishes. He was interested in the country. He wishes to explore, and now he's trapped up there, perhaps. Well, I won't say. Questions might be asked by the people.
Stitzer.
Mr. Kurtz is not popular in certain quarters. Mr. Kurtz is, of course, an exceptional man. Mr. Kurtz... Blauer's voice, which has started to fade from the soundtrack, is now overwhelmed by music. And this music makes reference to Blauer's voice, to the groans of the dying man, to the tinkle of Eddie's piano, to the somber overtones of a New York harbor. Blauer is still seen talking, but we cannot distinguish what he says, and the camera starts to pull back, smoothly but swiftly. Simultaneously, Blauer's image begins to wash out. Pan to take in the harbor with the steamer far below. Electric lights. It clears the harbor, takes in the black wall of the jungle beyond. Wipe. Moving upward, the starry sky, which fills the entire frame, dissolve out. The dark gray shadow of Marlowe superimposes the starry sky. He's leaning against the mast of his boat and smoking. The man inside gibbered and jabbered about his Mr. Kurtz, and outside the silent wilderness surrounded this cleared speck on the earth, great and invincible, like evil or truth, waiting patiently. The river, glittering, flowing broadly by without a murmur. And beyond the fence, the forest. And through the dim stir of that lamentable courtyard, the silence of the land went home to one's very heart. A great silence, round and above. Perhaps on some quiet night, the tremor of far-off drums. Blauer is sitting at the table, an enormous round dining table, with the other company men. Marlowe's shadow is superimposed, leaning against the mast of his boat, smoking.
Many voices talking at once.
Now, if it were only possible to establish a market elsewhere, because of substitute, fabrications cannot be discouraged. Maintain a firm hand, always a firm hand, for his ivory and mine. There must be bargaining. We have to bargain, us bargaining. It's not worthy of us. Our terms must be accepted at all times. The delays are, of course, unavoidable. My ivory! Mr. Kurtz might not approve of the best ivory. I mean, they all seem to be waiting for something, but all that ever came to them was disease. The word ivory rang in the air. I mean, you'd think they were praying for it, or praying to it. A taint of imbecile rapacity blew through it all like a whiff from some corpse.
The conversation of the company men becomes louder and audible.
Unavoidable delays. The semi-annual reports show that nothing would indicate that 1/3 of one's commission. You heard some very strange rumors. 9 months now. 9 months, not one. As far as I know, for £10 of prime ivory. Why not? Anything. Anything can be done in this country. Prime ivory. Prime ivory. Mr. Marlowe, how long will it take you to repair the riverboat? I haven't seen it yet.
Blau.
Well, the situation is serious, very.
Stets.
It's thought that in Europe that an expedition to relieve Mr. Kurtz would be, therefore, ill-advised at this time.
Blau.
It has been decided to withhold intelligence of his absence from the press. Shh.
Elsa has come in.
Are you done for the day?
Americus.
Yes, Miss Gruner. We ran out of dynamite. How's Brandenburg?
Elsa looks at Eddie.
Well, things are very upset. He won't last the night. Carbs lights a match and grunts assent. Butch starts to place checkers on the board. Carbs lights a cigar. The fever we have, very high. Death rate, more last month. 4.
Eddie.
Oh, that's not counting the natives. Of course not. Carbs moves a checker. Boots returns the move. Blauer leans over toward Marlowe, speaking under his breath. So, Mr. Marlowe, yes, you can understand our anxiety. Well, it's up to you, Mr. Marlowe, to bring him back. Yes? Blauer spells out the word Kurtz with his lips. It's up to you, Mr. Marlowe. You must take us to him. And where you're going, Mr. Marlowe, where you're going, it's much worse. Blauer. Now, when will the boat be ready? Blauer rises. Others are rising. Marlowe also gets up from the table. Others rise, they throw down their napkins, clear their throats, push back their chairs, pick their teeth. Blauer starts towards the door. Eddie goes over to the piano. Marlowe. Well, as for the boat, I haven't examined it yet. I don't know.
Blau.
Well, shall we say 3 months? The station's upriver. They don't last long up there. Maybe 3 months.
Eddie.
Shut up!
During the above, Marlowe has been watching Carbs. Eddie starts playing something loud. Marlowe looks from Carbs to Elsa. Her eyes are filled with tears.
Boots, what's wrong, Miss Gruner?
Blau.
You are an American, Mr. Marlowe. The absence of skilled mechanics in these times explains much. Still, I cannot help thinking, Mr. Marlowe, that you are more than a mere sympathizer. That you hold, undoubtedly, Mr. Marlowe holds, and undoubtedly some position of influence with our colonial interests. Yes, 3 months. That ought to do the affair.
Blauer exits toward the door. The others follow, and for a moment their voices can be heard in the roadway outside.
Goodbye, Miss Gruner. I go away tomorrow.
Eddie.
The steamer leaves tonight. I'm going upriver. Stations 2 and 3 will be hard for supplies. I go up by canoe. Not up to the top, but up as far as I can dare.
Elsa turns away from him. Elsa starts to play. Schulman starts away from the table, Pan with him as Marlowe watches. He passes Eddie, who is playing very quietly, and goes out the door. Eddie is at the piano, still playing softly with one hand. Eddie hands her a pencil over his shoulder, and as he does this, Marlowe catches a glimpse of his face. It is troubled. Eddie suddenly stops playing, and the moment is filled with a somewhat unpleasant chord. Elsa takes the pencil, pushes away the checkerboard, and clears a space on the table to make a diagram of the river and stations.
This is number 1. The first station.
She draws the number 1. Marlowe's eyes leave the board as he looks at Elsa. Eddie's piano is still more cautious, and now, as Elsa draws the heavy line of the river toward Marlowe...
Here, the jungle is very thick, but the river is deep. You will manage this easily.
Her hand draws the Roman numeral 2.
De Tirpitz is here. A young man with a club foot.
Pan up to Elsa. She is looking at Marlowe. Then she looks back at the board. She draws the line of the river toward him and continues.
The captain before you was killed here.
Back to Elsa's face. She is looking at Marlowe, but her hand on the board continues to draw the line of the river toward him until it is far as she can reach. Her hand draws the Roman numeral 3.
Station
In the
3.
silence, turns the board around so that the mouth of the river
is as far
faces Marlowe.
as Schulman would get with his canoe. This station is in very wild country. It is maintained because it is best near the elephants. For the cheapest trade, a few glass beads and some calico, the agents obtain great quantities of prime ivory, but they must be relieved often. It is impossible to live as far up the river as long and for very long. That is why you must make every haste to repair your boat. Beyond is unexplored.
Her hand draws the river very slowly, the pencil moving toward her.
There are cannibals. And Mr. Kurtz is somewhere here.
The pencil stops. There is silence. Camera pans up to Elsa's face as Marlowe looks at her, then pans over to the piano. Eddie's chair at the piano is empty. Marlowe looks across the room to the door leading to the other room. The door is just closing. Continuation of pan from closed door across wall to Elsa as Marlowe looks back at her. Their eyes meet.
Are you trying to scare me?
Elsa, slowly.
Are you frightened? No?
Silence.
I believe you.
Another longer silence. Elsa looking deeply into Marlowe's eyes. Then her mouth smiles at him. Her eyes still serious, brightening. Her smile doesn't waver. Her eyes burn on. Dissolve in starry sky.
It seems to me that I am trying to tell you a dream. But of course I can't. It's impossible. We dream alone.
The silhouette of Marlowe has started to fade. Music develops to accompany. Dissolve. Exterior. Settlement. And wrecked riverboat. Night. Seen from opposite bank of the river. A few lights glow on the hill. The music has either finished or is resolved into a cool, dark, static, sustained phrase. This silence, or this effect of silence, is interrupted by the sound of a groan close by. The dark form of a dying native, the one whom the company men promised not to beat, is lying in front of a rotting log. near corner of the dilapidated pier. He groans again, slowly and painfully. He dips his head into the muddy water and bathes his face.
I've seen the devils of the world, the devils that drive and sway men, violence and greed, and the devil of hot desire. But they were strong.
The native has started to crawl through the mud.
And here, in this land, I found the flabby devil, the flabby, pretending, weak-eyed devil of rapacious and pitiless folly.
At the sound of a distant boat whistle, we see the shadowy form of the steamer smoking away in the distance. It blows its whistle faintly and mournfully.
How insidious he could be, too. I was only to find out several months later, and 1,000 miles up that river. Pan passed towards the front of the riverboat. It reveals Elsa in half silhouette, standing near the front of the pilot house, looking up the river. Pan across, a very beautiful shot of the river. Dissolve. Repaired riverboat day. From the same angle, another long shot. Pan away to Elsa standing near the front of the pilot house, looking up the river. She's in the same position as in the night shot, but she wears a different outfit. It's 3 months later. Voices of company men arguing, giving orders activity. Also sounds of activity as the boat is loaded. We now see the repaired condition of the boat. It is pulled up alongside the wharf and is smoking feverishly. A little knot of company men grouped around Elsa, their voices raised in excitement. The argument has been going on over the above action. I can only repeat to Miss Gruner what has been made very clear to her. The river is no place for a woman. Mr. Kurtz will not be pleased. He'll be very angry, very angry. We cannot permit it. I think we better get started. Miss Gruner cannot sail on this boat. Pan from the deck, across the inside of the pilot house toward the wheel at which the steersman is standing. The river and jungle ahead, the arguing company men on the lower deck. I don't think you have the authority. Authority? Ridiculous. Mr. Blower is in charge of the station. I'm responsible to Europe for what goes on here. Who are you to question it? Mind you, I don't think it's a good idea for Miss Gruner to go. Miss Gruner, I command you to get off. Oh, come on, Blower. Don't take that tone. The argument has become unintelligible because of the amount of people involved. Marlowe settles the whole thing by blowing the steam whistle. And then as he turns from the wheel to the side window, Pan crosses the white pilot house. Marlowe turns from the wheel to the side window. The movement passes the superstructure beside the front window. It moves forward to the side window, leans out, and pans to get a shot of the leave-taking activity on the wharf and on the deck. Everybody who isn't sailing rushes ashore. There is much yelling of final instructions on both sides. Over this confused babble, we hear Eddie's voice yelling, "Goodbye, Marlowe! Marlowe, I won't see you again." Why not? Going home! Got my orders today. Eddie opens his mouth to go, but a fresh fusillade from the sound of the company men on the shore and on the boat makes conversation completely impractical. Eddie thinks better of it and now treats Marlowe to some pantomime, which includes an impression of a man blowing a bugle, another man saluting, marching, shooting a rifle, and being shot. "You?" Marlowe calls as Eddie is fixing the rifle. Eddie has started the getting shot business as he registers it. Marlowe blows the steam whistle again, and the boat starts moving along the wharf. Eddie, following alongside, calls up, "Take care of Elsa! Good luck!"
Elsa.
Poor Eddie. I wonder what he'll look like in uniform. The boat is moving up the river, away from the station. Pan across the front window, we catch the reflection of Marlowe at the wheel.
Elsa is not looking at Marlowe, but instead is looking out of the door toward the retreating station. Now she looks at Marlowe, almost smiling. She's apprehensive, but she trusts Marlowe absolutely. She looks away again, this time up the river before them, and Marlowe, who is at the wheel, turns forward. Pan to front window, and then Elsa as she moves next to him. The following dialogue plays over the reflections.
Do you mind if I stay here? Of course not.
They are both watching the river and not each other's reflections.
I'm glad you won the argument. What do you mean? Well, I'm glad you're coming up the river. I guess I shouldn't be. I didn't win the argument, I just didn't get off. It's going to be dangerous. But you told me that the first day I came.
They're silent now for some time. There is only the sound of the engine, of the boat cutting its way through the muddy water, the grave, deliberate churning of the paddle astern.
Are you thinking about him? Yes. You're a good navigator, aren't you? I've been on a lot of boats. Don't know much about rivers, though, particularly this one. You told me nearly everything that first day, just 2 ivory stations, then darkness. One of those blank places on the map. He'll have a map. Will he? Oh, yeah. He'll make one. And he wouldn't leave it blank. That's where he's been. Will Kurtz like it that you're taking these risks for him? Oh, he despises cowardice, even in women. He doesn't know I'm here at all. No, I was away for him in Europe. He was to come back for me 4 months ago. There were no letters. I mean, they wouldn't tell me anything at the company, so I came out here in spite of them. You see, I was afraid. He was almost too popular. And there was no good reason sending him to the dark country except to get him out of Europe. And that's why I'm going to be along when they find him. He's needed in Europe now. Needed badly. But I can't trust these agents. They're all afraid of Kurtz, and they hardly know him. It's impossible to know him without loving him. And how long have you known him? Do you mean how much do I love him? No. Well, we met nearly 2 years ago. I mean, I didn't like him at first. I mean, I thought he was, well, I don't know what, cruel, ruthless, first impressions. I mean, I wasn't very intelligent or grown up. What made you change your mind? Well, it's not easy to refuse him anything. I mean, he wanted to know me, and I got him to... Well, you know, he had this... What's the word? He had this nobility. Oh, yeah, I know, that sounds stuffy, but he's anything but that. His laughter. No, I can't tell you about him. You probably hate him now. He's just a demagogue in uniform to you. To somebody who doesn't know him. I think I know what Kurtz means to you people. But what I can't tell is what he means to you.
Carbs.
Are you talking about Kurtz? I hope you don't mind my joining, Miss Groner, but I'm just about as welcome back there as you are. Ask Mr. Marlowe. He's the captain. Oh, the manager would like to see you, Mr. Marlowe. What about? Well, who knows? One of those conferences of theirs, the kind that never end. We want for guidance of the cause entrusted to us by Europe, higher intelligence, loftier sympathy, a singleness of purpose. Who says that? They all do. But of course, we wouldn't understand, Marlowe. We are inferior races. So he comes here, that special being, that special being, as you ought to know. Why should I know? I can't leave the wheel now. The river's dangerous here. It's dangerous all the way. You have a steersman? The half-caste? Monsieur! Yes, master. Come in. Take the wheel. If anything looks bad, blow a whistle. Understand?
Marlowe walks through the door onto the deck towards where the company men are seated in a group beneath the awning. They watch Marlowe approach.
Blow.
Ah, yes, Mr. Marlowe, yes.
They continue to look at Marlowe.
Mr. Marlowe, when do you reach the second station? Well, don't you know?
Blower just looks at him with a slight smile.
We have none of us made the trip before, Mr. Marlowe. Well, as far as I can tell, we should get there tomorrow. Oh, Mr. de Tirpitz will be very impatient. You understand, it has been some time since he's been relieved. Oh, Schulman went up, of course, a few weeks ago with some supplies. Oh, a few canned goods. Mr. de Tirpitz must almost be starving. The point is, Marlowe, we cannot afford to take our time on the trip. There must be no delays. Delays? Good God, delays? We are responsible for the life of Mr. Kurtz. If you hadn't wrecked the boat before I got here... Mr. Marlowe, yes. Mr. Marlowe, is there anything to interfere with you making full steam ahead? What do you mean? And what are you implying by interfere?
Blower shrugs, very, very slightly. There is a pause.
Do you realize how difficult this river is to navigate? Precisely. Listen. Listen. Drums. Anything special?
Blower shrugs his small shrug. We can hear the drums.
Mr. Marlowe, we're in a hurry. Nothing must slow us up. Now, if Miss Gruner... What about Miss Gruner? Miss Gruner is engaged to Mr. Kurtz. I don't understand you. She belongs to Kurtz. We hear the sound of a terrible crash, and we see that a low-hanging bough has hit the pilot house and is sweeping across it. The whistle blows. Miss Gruner, are you all right?
Marlowe.
Reverse engines. Malchus! The limb of the tree has cleared the pilot house. And because the boat is still going forward, it's brushing against the sailcloth awning. A branch catches up the awning and twists it loose. Melchers seems somehow caught up in the big bow.
The whistle is blowing steadily. Now slowly the engines start to reverse. The bow, with Melchers in it, still breaks its way across the boat, but more slowly as the boat's forward movement is checked.
It's a snake! A snake!
Looking up into the bow, he sees that what holds Melchers in it is a great snake. It continues to sweep across the boat.
Shoot
The
it!
paddle thrashing wildly.
Shoot the
aft.
snake! No, don't shoot,
But
don't
they're already
shoot!
firing into the bow.
You'll kill him!
The whistle still screams, so do the men and the native crew. The guns bark, the paddle clatters wildly. The boat has almost stopped, but the bow still moves on back. Melchers staring down at the scene. Now it hits the smokestack, deliberately dislodges it, and knocks it off into the river. The smoke vomits black soot out onto the deck, onto the men, and the snake holding him, covering the sailcloth with soot, clouding the whole deck. The boat has stopped.
You fools! You'll kill him! You'll stop the engine! Stop
The
the
white
engine!
faces and the white suits of the men are black. They go on shooting into the bow. The engine stops, so does the whistle. The smoke settles, the black smoke from the engine, but the air thickens with the white smoke of the guns. The boat's drifting backwards with the current so that the bow is coming forward again toward Marlowe. The men slow up their fire, watching the bow with their guns. 9 feet of the great snake falls out of the bow, and Melchers, released, falls onto the deck at Marlowe's feet. Marlowe kneels quickly, looking into his face.
He's dead.
With a nasty, scrunching jolt, the boat runs up on the bank. One of the native crew is chopping at the bow, and as Marlowe looks up, it falls with the snake on the deck. Marlowe rises. Elsa has come out of the pilot house. Marlowe looks into her face as he rises from the corpse of Melcher. The men stand around and fire at the sooty, writhing thing until it has crawled free of the bow. Somebody throws the bow overboard. They go on shooting at the snake until it stops moving and lies motionless in the mess of dirty awning, lines, overturned tables, and camp chairs. Most of them stop. Finally, only Stitzer is shooting. and he goes on and on, long after it's necessary. Now Elsa is standing beside Marlowe. Struntz stops shooting. They all stare at the snake. In the silence, the drums are heard again. Suddenly, the snake stirs, and before anybody can raise a gun, it slides, battered and blackened by soot, quickly and silently off the boat and into the jungle. The drums are louder. The great trees move past us phosphorescently in what is almost a fade out. Faint sound of drums. The burial of Melchers from a position on roof of aft cabin into the murky water. The luminous panorama of big trees behind this. Elsa faintly saying a burial service. Beneath her voice, the sound of drums. Melchers' body, stitched up in a sack, is heaved into the muddy water, creating a big splash. The drums grow louder still, up the river again, through the towering jungle.
Drums. 1,000 drums. The steamer toiled along slowly on the edge of a black and incomprehensible frenzy. The prehistoric man was cursing us, praying to us, walking on us. Who could tell? We couldn't understand because we were too far and we couldn't remember, because we were traveling in the night of the first ages. Those ages that are gone, leaving hardly a sign and no memories. But the drums spoke to you, out of the Stone Age. You didn't know the men in there. What thrilled you was just the thought of their humanity, like yours. The faintest trace of a response to the terrible frankness of that noise. A meaning in it for you. And why not? The mind of man is capable of anything, because everything is in it. All the past, as well as all the future. A man can face that frenzy, but at least be as much of a man as those on the shore. I mean, what's in there after all? But truth. A man must meet that truth with his own true stuff. I mean, you wonder I didn't go ashore for a howl and a dance? Well, no, I didn't. I had to watch the steering. The wooden banks slipped past us slowly. The shot noise was left behind, the interminable miles of silence. And we crept on towards Kurtz.
The picture of moving jungle as they push through it up the river is now framed by the window of the pilot house, and we can see Marlowe's reflection again on the glass. Silence, except for the throb of the motor and the thrashing of the paddle blades aft. Then in the glass, we see the steersman come in.
Look!
Now we see Marlowe sees. Through the dirty window and up the river to our right, a couple of little tin buildings and a landing.
Station number 2, Master. Who's that? Manager, station number 2.
The approaching dock has suddenly been crowded with natives, hoisting big tusks of ivory on their shoulders as they come out, all looking up at the boat. De Tirpitz, and particularly his assistant, can be heard barking angrily at the natives.
What's this one like?
Elsa looks at Marlowe.
They say he's not so nice. Bad blue blood.
The boat is successfully docked. The company men can be heard chattering greetings and bawling out orders. Merce comes into the pilot house, his face bruised from having been hit.
Yeah! You American, yeah? Yeah, close the door!
He closes the sliding door and confronts Elsa and Marlowe.
Hey, the Tirpitz back there. He be the manager here. They're busy. They don't see me here.
Elsa.
What's happened to your face? Ah, he hit me. He hit me all time. I'm used to it. What do you want with me? Look out there.
He indicates the dock, leans out and points to registered natives on the dock busy loading ivory under the supervision of the company man.
Ivory! Prime ivory! No fossil, all the very best. You never saw so much ivory. All your life, you never saw so much. The most ivory anybody ever got. All those months. He beats me. Now I get back at him.
Who are you talking about?
The Tuppets! He's telling them it's his ivory. He takes the credit. He likes, it's not his ivory.
Suddenly, Moose is no longer looking at Marlowe. He's looking past him, over his shoulder, his face frozen with terror. Marlowe turns from Elsa and Moose to the door. It is open, and in it stands the club-footed manager, Luitpold de Tirpitz. He is looking past Marlowe to Moose.
Blauer. Mr. de Tirpitz.
Blauer appears in the doorway behind de Tirpitz.
Ah,
Stitzer is hurrying up after him.
Marlowe. I'd like to introduce you. Mr. Luitpold de Tirpitz, manager of number 2. Oh, Mr. Marlowe. You seem to have met my assistant, Mr. Siebert Moose.
De Tirpitz looks at Elsa, a surprised, almost insolent look. Then he turns questioningly to Blauer.
Miss Gruner is the fiancée to Mr. Kurtz. Oh, yes. Oh. Is the ceremony to be held in the jungle? Mr. Moose, I think you better look after the loading. We're undermanned. Most of the boys deserted 2 months ago.
Moose, a very scared little man, starts towards the door.
What do you do? What do you mean with the ivory? Don't you know who I am? No, I don't. What? I mean, have you forgotten? I'm not his assistant. He died. I'm working for him, but I'm not his assistant. Then who are you? I'm Mr. Kurtz's assistant. I came down with the ivory. It's not his ivory. It belongs to Mr. Kurtz.
The whistle, as Marlowe blows it. It is the first note of music which takes over. A sudden shot, with music coming over, showing the natives fore and aft, taking in the lines. Series of dissolves, with music coming over, showing the river and jungle as riverboat continues its journey.
Going up that river was like traveling back to the earliest beginnings of the world, when vegetation rioted on the earth and the big trees were kings.
Moving shot of river seen from the boat as it moves up between great walls of the jungle.
An empty stream, a great silence. The long stretches of the waterway ran on, deserted, into the gloom, into the strange world of plants and water and silence. Silence, but not peace.
Long shot from slightly above, of the riverboat seen from the jungle itself. It looks small and pathetic, toiling up the river.
And on we went into that silence, along empty reaches, round still bends between the high walls of our winding way, reverberating in hollow claps the ponderous beat of the stern wheel. Trees, millions of trees, massive, immense, running up high, and at their foot, hugging the bank against the stream, crept the little begrimed boat, like a sluggish beetle crawling on the floor of a lofty portico. Where the company man imagined it crawled to, I don't know. To some place where they expected to get something, I bet. But for me, it crawled towards Kurtz.
Marlowe's reflection at the wheel is seen in the window, and beyond it, the ship's searchlight is playing on the dark river. Carbs and de Tirpitz is somewhere behind the pilot house, unseen by Marlowe. Everything is overheard rather than actually witnessed by Marlowe. On the soundtrack, under the voices of Carbs and de Tirpitz, very faintly, the sound of drums.
Each station should be like a beacon on the road toward better things. A center for trade, of course, but also for improvement, for instructions. Did he say that? It's called idealism. He's crazy. He's crazy. They're all
The
crazy.
voices continue,
It
but
was
the words
Turpitz
become indistinguishable
and Carbs.
as Marlowe begins to narrate over them.
He was standing behind them, behind the pilot house. And I guess they thought I couldn't hear them. Anything can be done in this country. Anything. But when one comes out here, the Turpitz, you concede. You know, it's not to gaze at the moon. Nobody here. You understand? Nobody here can endanger your position. I could tell they were talking about Kurtz. Kurtz, of course. Yes, he's up there. Yes. Is he alone? Yes, he's alone, quite alone. He sent Mus down the river with a note to me in these terms. This was what he said: "Clear this poor devil out of the country and don't bother to send any more like him. I'd rather be alone." And nothing since then, of course. Ivory? Yes, I know. Lots of it. Record consignments. Prime sort. Lots. Most annoying. From him. It shows us in a very bad light. No man can live in that climate. That's true. Ah, my boy. Trust to this. I say, trust to this. He meant the river. The lurking death. The hidden evil. The profound darkness of its heart. There is a moment's silence. I can't sleep. The Turpitz and Carbs are still up. I heard them talking. So did I. I'm afraid I interrupted them.
There is a short silence. Marlowe is looking through the window at the river, seen in the dim glare of the searchlight. Elsa's reflection is on the glass next to his.
Isn't it dangerous, this sailing at night? Yes. Can you hear the drums? Yes, I think so. They must be very far away. See that? There it is.
He rings the bell.
Number 3, master.
Sound of the steam whistle as Marlowe blows it. De Turpitz has been heard, since sound of the bell, limping toward the pilot house door. Without turning, Marlowe can tell from his voice that de Turpitz has entered.
Are you excited, Miss Gruner? What about? Well, there might just be a chance. You never know. He might be here. What makes you think that Kurtz might be here? Well, he could be here.
The steersman has reached the light. Now he turns it on the buildings of the station. There is silence. The light plays slowly from building to building.
Blowers calling. Hello? 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 Silence. Hey, Marlowe. Yes? Blow the whistle. Hey, Marlowe. What is it? Come down here. No. You come up here. What? I'd better stay at the wheel. Oh, shut up with that whistle. We might want to get started quick. Why? Why? Stop that whistle! Listen! Quiet!
Finally, there is quiet. Very faintly, drums are heard. Marlowe is still looking out the window at the empty station buildings.
What did I tell you? Marlowe, what do you make of this? I told you, strange things were happening on the river. I was speaking to Mr. Marlowe. Well, we better get off and take a look. That might not be advisable. You mean you're afraid?
Blower turns to de Turpitz with that faint smile of his.
Mr. de Turpitz, why don't you go ashore? All right, I will. Will you come too, Mr. Marlowe? Mr. Marlowe must stay by the wheel. In case you have to leave suddenly. Oh, very well.
De Tirpitz goes out. Cobbs looks nervously after him. The drums, a moment's silence, and then De Tirpitz can be heard yelling orders in native dialect. De Tirpitz being helped on the landing by the natives. It is dark.
You might give me a light.
The light moves around and picks up De Tirpitz. He is on the landing looking toward prow of the boat, waiting for the light. Now he picks up the little dock toward the main building. The light follows him. He goes in. A pause. Then he reappears and starts back to the boat.
What did you find?
De Tirpitz stops at this and squints up at the light.
They're in there. Why don't they come out?
De Tirpitz smiles.
Are they dead? Yes.
The company man can be heard reacting to this intelligence.
Fever? No. Who are they? I can't tell. They haven't any heads.
Sensation on board the boat.
Start the boat! Go on, Marlowe! Start it up! Massacre!
Turn around from dock to outside of pilot house as Marlowe turns to Elsa. Then as he walks into pilot house, sound of uproar comes from all over the boat. Elsa, Cobbs, Blauer follow Marlowe into the pilot house. Stitzer appears in the doorway behind him.
Don't you think Mr. Marlowe had better start up the engines? Mr. Blauer, these are war drums. Oh, by all means, by all means, by all means. Start it up, Mr. Marlowe! Where are we going? Moss comes in. We're going up the river! You're crazy! Start the engines, Marlowe! Start the engines! We can't go up. It's suicide. Oh, of course we're going up. We're going up the river to save Mr. Kurtz. We're saving Mr. Kurtz, says Mouse. There is a question, of course, says Blauer. There is a question whether it would be safe to go down either if the tribes have arriven. Oh, for God's sakes, says Cobbs. Start the engine. We can't stay here. We'll all be killed. We've got our duty. Our duty. Mr. Kurtz is in danger.
Tirpitz comes through the doorway.
Mr. Kurtz is dead.
They all turn to him.
Whoa. Whoa. Was he one of those down there? He might be. I know he's alive. You think so? We can't desert him. We've got our duty. Oh, be quiet. Marlowe, you must get us back to the coast if you can. Just a moment, Mr. de Tirpitz. If we turn back now, there will be some difficulty explaining matters in Europe. It might be very embarrassing. Oh, my God, you people care more for your jobs than your lives. I am afraid, Mr. Blauer. I am afraid that Mr. de Tirpitz, if Mr. Kurtz is alive, go down there and look in the building. No, thank you. There's war on the river. Do you understand that? We've got to get help from up the coast. We've got to get down there and radio the English. Very, very embarrassing. There's a canoe down there, Mr. Blauer. Why not go down, one of us, and send some of the boys, and they'll make good time with the current. Miss Gruner will go down with him. What's that? I'm the captain of this boat. Miss Gruner is not going any further. She's returning to the coast. But I don't want to. I'm sorry. Very well, Mr. Marlowe. You take the authority. I take the authority. I take all the authority. Who's going with her? You're not. Where's Mr. Strunz? He's going. Strunz! Yes. Get into the water. You're taking Miss Gruner down the river.
Everybody except Marlowe and Elsa has left the pilot house, the voices growing fainter as they go. Now there is silence, except for the drums.
Elsa, very quietly.
Should you do this?
Marlowe.
You mustn't go further. I know that.
Music introduces the transition. There is a very slow, long shot of the canoe, seen from the top of the cabin. Strunz is in the prow of the canoe. There are 3 natives with paddles, and Elsa is sitting in the back. It starts down the river. Elsa turns and looks back. The light swings across the deserted station and hits her. It remains on the canoe as the natives paddle away into the gloom. Dissolve. Close-ups of each of the company men, their faces strained with anxiety. Then the faces of the remaining natives. Shot down the river, seen from roof of pilot house. The canoe is gone, the river is empty, the paddle wheel starts, the light swings around. Pan, following the light's progress, past the bank of the river, the jungle, the buildings of the station, and holds on the empty river ahead. The rhythm of drums changes. It is now even more violent, even faster, even louder. Long shot of the hut on the bank of the river, seen from the boat by daylight, as the boat approaches it.
Some 50 miles beyond, we came upon a hut of reeds.
Marlowe's voice narrating carries over from the previous shot without a break. As he speaks, dissolve into close-up of Blauer, Stitzer, and De Turpitz in front of the hut, gathered round a piece of wood from which Mr. Blauer is reading.
And on a stack of firewood, we found a piece of board with faded pencil writing on it.
Blauer reads it out loud.
Work for you. Hurry up. Approach cautiously.
He looks up.
There's a signature, but it's not legible. Not Kurtz. Much longer word. Maybe Schulman? Hurry up. Where? Up the river?
He hands the piece of wood to Marlowe. Close shot of it. Marlowe's hand, and focuses on the words, approach cautiously.
Approach cautiously.
Marlowe's hand lowers the piece of wood as he finishes the word, cautiously. Blauer and De Turpitz are looking up the river. The boat is moving up the river. We are in the pilot house, and as Marlowe speaks, the drums are heard over soundtrack.
The steamer seemed at her last gasp, and I caught myself listening on tiptoe for the last beat of the boat. But still we crawled on towards Kurtz, deeper and deeper into the heart of darkness.
Moving from another angle, as boat continues up the river, the drums cease. Blauer and De Turpitz are in the pilot house with Marlowe. We don't see them. We just hear their voice.
Mr. Marlowe, I think we will not proceed after sundown. Our light may be seen. Do you think we aren't watched?
The engine can be heard to stop, the paddles slowing and stopping as the boat stops. Silence. Exterior river twilight.
It was very quiet there.
Marlowe is knocking the ashes out of his pipe onto the edge of the prow. As the dissolve finishes, the ashes fall into the river below and hiss as they strike the water, tilt up from the water into the gloom ahead, and on up the silent trees above.
The living trees might have been changed into stones, even the slenderest twig. It wasn't sleep. It seemed unnatural, like a state of trance. You looked on amazed and began to suspect yourself of being deaf. And then the night came suddenly and struck you, blind as well.
Riverboat and river night. Exterior. At first, very quietly, the eerie bamboo effect begins. This is a queer, windy orchestration of hoots and whistles produced by a big bunch of braves blowing on the tops of bamboo sticks of various sizes. After this is established, the voices of Moose and Stitzer are heard, calling out to each other behind. Pan slowly across the dark face of the jungle, up the murky river, around the other bank, and back until a part of the boat is in the frame.
What's that? I know what it is. Marlowe, look!
He can be seen to put something into his mouth. There is a strange, windy sound, almost in Marlowe's ear.
What's that?
Cobbs giggles foolishly. What Cobbs was blowing on was the top of an almost empty bottle of champagne.
He's drunk. That's how they do it.
He
That's how
blows
they do
again
it.
on the mouth of the bottle, making the same sound as before.
Where did you get that? Well, medical comforts. Are you suggesting that the natives there are all blowing on champagne bottles? Yes, yes, different sizes.
A lower, more ominous note is sounded from the invisible orchestra in the jungle.
That's a magnum.
Suddenly, and with real violence, Blower strikes Cobbs a stinging blow with the flat of his hand. Cobbs looks up, dazed and stupid with drink. Stitzer, with a noise at once like a growl and a whine, jumps at his throat. He hangs there for a moment like a dog. Then, before the others can pull him off, he lets go and runs towards the other end of the boat.
Stitzer! Stitzer!
Sound of a gunshot, and then the hysterical voices of the company men.
Stitzer, don't do that! Put that down. He mustn't!
The conversation of the company man outside has continued excitedly, but too low to be audible.
They know that magic. What magic? Gun magic. He means we should only use new tricks. Tricks they don't know. I wonder what Kurtz used.
From the jungle comes a new sound, lower than the others, sustained and vibrant. With another giggle, Cobbs raises the bottle to his mouth, opens his mouth to blow. Then he freezes in that position, his mouth open, his eyes staring. The focus on his face now moves down very slightly to show a thin sliver of an arrow through his neck. He drops the champagne bottle. Marlowe hears it fall and watches him topple to the floor. Pan down to floor with the body. Marlowe's still staring at Cobbs's body when the steersman falls on top of it, an arrow in his chest. The steersman is dead, but his eyes are on Marlowe.
Mr. Stitzer has been hurt by Mr. de Tirpitz.
At the sound of Butz's voice, pan up to register Butz, standing in doorway.
May we have the champagne?
Butz has seen the bodies of Cobbs and the steersman. His eyes widen. Outside, there is a terrible shout, a command from the jungle. Drums fill the night. Moving shot of the jungle seen from the deck of the boat. The company men are running for their guns and looking around into the darkness. Stationary shot of the jungle from the lower deck. It is now dawn. The jungle can hardly be seen for the white mist.
When the sun rose, there was a white fog, very warm and clammy, and more blinding than the night. What we could see was just the steamer we were on, and that was all. Our eyes were no more use to us than if we'd buried miles deep in a heap of cotton wool. It felt like it, too. Choking, warm, stifling.
Blower's form appears vaguely in the mist.
Mr. Marlowe, I think we'd better go at once.
Blower moves out of the mist.
I authorize
Speaking
you
into
to
the
take
lens.
all the risks.
Pause.
I refuse to take any. Well, I must defer to your judgment. You're the captain.
Now the head of the cannibal crew moves into the shot.
Catch him! Catch him! Catch him! Give him to us! Give him to us! Who? Those men in there! Bad tribes! You catch him! You catch him! You give him to us! To you? To you? What would you do with him? Eat him!
Marlowe moves past the head of the crew into the mist and over to the rail, where he stands staring into the strange pattern of fog and jungle.
I guess I should have been horrified. But it occurred to me that my crew must be very hungry. I mean, why they didn't go for us, I don't know. I mean, they were 30 to 5. I mean, big, powerful men, and not much capacity to weigh the consequences. It occurred to me I might be eaten. I might be eaten by them before very long, and I admit that I just saw in a new light, as it were, how unwholesome Their company men looked, and I hoped, oh yes, I actually hoped, that I wasn't quite so unappetizing. My God! Pan across mist and jungle as Marlowe turns to Blower. Blower is several yards away and can barely be distinguished in the mist. He is standing at the rail facing Marlowe.
My God! What's wrong?
Blower begins to whimper and cry inarticulately. De Turpin stands in front of camera, hurries ahead of it to Blower's side. Blower has been pounding on the rail with his left hand.
Get hold of yourself!
Camera tilts down to register that an arrow has pinned Blower's hand to the rail. Just as the arrow registers, the voice of Mus is heard.
Look!
Screaming idiotically,
Mr. Blower!
Blower seizes Stitzer with his free arm and hangs on to him, staring into the camera. Stitzer's back is to us. There is now the low, deadly sound of the first volley of arrows thudding into the wood of the cabin, clattering onto the iron deck, and pinging against the tin funnel.
Arrows!
At this moment, De Turpin yanks the arrow out of Blower's hand, and Blower shrieks with pain, seizes his hand, and runs off behind camera, past Marlowe's left.
Down! Get down!
He drops out of frame. Another volley of arrows. A distant shriek from one of the native crew. Sounds of gunshots as Stitzer starts to shoot into the jungle wildly. Another rain of arrows. This time, a large quantity have struck the pilot house and cabin beneath it with such violence. Pan around to take in the spectacle of the arrows quivering in the sides of the ship. The sound of a skyrocket.
Look!
Pan across to the jungle. As Marlowe looks, the flare and sparks of a skyrocket, cutting white through the mist. Another rocket goes up.
It isn't lightning.
Another rocket.
It's fireworks! How do you know?
Another rocket.
It's his magic! Fireworks! Fireworks! Kurtz is alive! Kurtz is alive? Look at this.
De Turpin holds up a steel-tipped arrow.
The arrow you pulled out of my hand. God!
The natives are getting quite civilized. This was the Stone Age until lately. Now look at this. It's an arrow. Very primitive weapon, except this one has a steel tip. Behind them in the jungle, another rocket goes up. A big one. It blossoms in the mist above the jungle, lingers for a moment with a shower of dimly perceived sparks, and then disappears. Dissolve. Black screen. Marlowe's voice. I'm not disclosing any trade secrets, but I want you to understand now that Mr. Kurtz had taken a high seat amongst the devil of the land. I mean, literally. Dissolve out. Marlowe is in his boat, leaning against the mast. His face almost fills the screen. He looks directly into the lens. I have full information about these things. You see, I have the care of his memory. Well, he won't be forgotten. Whatever he was not common. Let's say his nerves went wrong. He presided at certain midnight dances ending with unspeakable rites, which I gathered were offered up to him. To Mr. Kurtz himself. You can't understand. How could you? With solid pavement under your feet, surrounded by kind neighbors ready to cheer you or fall on you, stepping delicately between the butcher and the policeman, the holy terror of scandal and the gallows and lunatic asylums. How can you imagine what particular region, the man of man's first ages, that a man's untrampled feet may take him? Take him into by way of solitude, utter silence, where no warning voice, no kind neighbor can be heard whispering of public opinion. These little things make all the great difference. When they're gone, you must fall back on your own strength, your own capacity.
slow dissolve, exterior, rolling marshland, night. Few arrows can be seen still sticking in the sides of the pilot house. The fog is very thick, so that the boat is seen in semi-silhouette.
I'm not trying to excuse or explain. I'm trying to account for Mr. Kurtz. For the shade of Mr. Kurtz. Why do we leave the boat? Because we can't go any further. Where are we going?
Stitzer speaks to Butz's back as he
Idiot!
passes. The crippled figure of De Tirpitz shows black against the white mist.
We're going after Kurtz.
Blauer stops at this, somewhat below De Tirpitz, glaring up at him.
Don't know what you mean by after him.
How do you Americans say it, Marlowe? How do you say it? Dead or alive?
I don't like your attitude.
Well, we can scarcely call ourselves a rescue party now.
I mean, you don't rescue a man who shoots at you with steel arrows.
Stitzer swings away, leaning down. He picks up an armload of rifles and he straightens with them. De Tirpitz speaks again.
Do you think we will ever get out of here?
Mr. Kurtz did not order that attack on the river. He called it off. Did you hear that?
Yes, I heard it.
Moose was his assistant. He's been up there with him.
De Tirpitz limps down towards Moose and stops, still looking at Moose.
They love him. Who loves him? The cannibals? Yes. Why? You don't know him. You haven't heard him speak.
De Tirpitz turns away from Moose, adjusting his rifle on his shoulder. As he turns, he catches Marlowe's eye.
Come on, Marlowe.
There was nothing on earth.
Nothing on earth to prevent him killing those whom he displeased. I mean, I disobeyed him, but I didn't clear out. Not that time. And not until he left me down the river later on. No, I couldn't leave him. I had to be careful, of course, until he got friendly again and he had the fever again. And after that, I had to keep out of his way, but I didn't mind. I got to see a lot of him before that.
De Tirpitz reaches the summit of the hill before the others. Now he stops. Blauer, Schnitzer, and the rest come up to level with him and stop too. Men are out of the picture. But a part of De Tirpitz's head and shoulders are in frame, which is almost blank because of the thickness of the fog. Vague impressions of swamp can be seen stretching out into the distance. Above this there is a slight rift in the mist, through which appear, silhouetted against the lowering sky, outlines of a row of poles, each pole supporting a human head. They are sufficiently distant and obscured by the mist to make it impossible for the company men to be sure of what they see.
What are those things out there, Mr. Blauer? Are they? Well, you better run over and take a look. Go on. Yes, Mr. Blauer?
Butz appears now in frame as he moves out towards the row of heads and descends the hill. During this, De Tirpitz takes a step forward, and now all three figures hold their positions, watching Butz as he makes his way across the marsh towards the poles. Now Mose's voice is heard again, close to Marlowe. It sounds a little frenzied.
He hated all this, but somehow he couldn't get away. And when I had the chance, I begged him to try and leave while there was time, and he'd say yes, but he'd go off again on another of his trips. Trips? Well, he'd disappear for weeks. Forget himself amongst those people. Forget himself, you know. What was he doing? Exploring or what? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. He discovered lots of mountains and a lake, too. Lake Kurtz. I mean, I don't know exactly in which direction. It was too dangerous to inquire, but it must be. It must be back there somewhere.
Blauer moves into the picture between Stitzer and Tirpitz.
Where? Where we are going now? Towards the fireworks. Those expeditions were mostly for ivory. But still, he had no goods to trade with at that time. Well, they had lots of good cartridges left, even yet. To speak plainly, he raided the country. But how could he? He was alone. He had the cannibals. They adore him. What can you expect? He came to them with thunder and lightning, you know, and they'd never seen anything like it. They were It was very terrible. It can be very...
They're all staring at Moose.
You can't judge Mr. Kurtz. You can't judge him. You can't judge him as you would an ordinary man. Of course not. Well, I'm glad to hear you say that, De Turpis.
During this, camera pans very slightly to center on De Turpitz.
And you're all good at that. You've had experience for several years now, explaining things in Europe. Well, here's something you're not going to get to
Turpitz
explain.
turns and starts down.
I've put up with it in Europe. I had to. But I don't have to here.
Butz runs into the picture. They turn to him. He stops.
The heads. Up there on those poles. Human heads. So? But they aren't natives. They're the heads of white men. The ones that were missing at Station 3? Well, you know, I thought they'd turn up. Shocking. Oh, but why? Why? Why do you say that? Why do you say shocking? That's how the rest of them got their power back there in Europe. I mean, this shouldn't surprise you. I mean, you've seen this kind of thing in the city streets. There is nothing here to implicate Mr. Kurtz. There were natives' heads, too. They were rebels. Rebels? Wow. They look very subdued to me.
Moose turns and looks into Marlowe's eyes.
You don't know how such a life ties a man like Mr. Kurtz. Me, I'm a simple man. I have no great thoughts. I want nothing from anybody. I don't understand. And I did my best to keep him alive. And that's enough. I had no hand in all of this. I have no ability. There wasn't a drop of medicine, a mouthful of invalid food. He wasn't shamefully abandoned. Shamefully. A man like that with such ideas. Shameful, shameful. De Turpitz, I don't care what you do to me. You or the cannibals. But I am going to kill that man.
De Turpitz turns and starts striding away, down into the marsh.
De Turpitz! I put up with you upstarts and you pirates long enough. I don't have to put up with it here. You drove me out of here. I'm going to kill him. What shall we do?
Stitzer lifts up his rifle and shows it meaningly to Blauer.
No. Let's wait. Let's wait and see.
They look into each other's eyes. Then Stitzer turns and starts away, following De Turpitz. Blauer, darting a quick look into camera lens, follows him. The temple, showing the lake and savages on the shore. As this dissolves in, De Turpitz's back almost fills the frame. Blauer, Stitzer, and Butz appear, move several yards beyond camera, and stop on either side of the frame with their backs to camera, looking at the scene before them. Long shot toward the lake to take in the apparently limitless field of natives on their hands and knees on the ground in front of the lake. De Turpitz is halfway toward the lake. He turns and looks back towards camera as Blauer, Stitzer, and Moose and Butz walk into the scene, picking their way among the natives. Close-up of the heads of the company men looking out across the lake to the temple. Music lowers to allow words. Blauer turns and looks at the company men.
What shall we do? Well?
De Turpitz calling out from the background.
Kurtz is up there!
Blauer darts a quick look over his shoulder at De Turpitz and the lake beyond.
What is that?
Blauer looks apprehensively at Moose and
It's a
others
temple!
following his glance.
A temple! Well, there are canoes. Perhaps we should proceed at once across the lake. But suppose Mr. Kurtz is being held captive. What are those natives doing on their faces? I never saw so many. I never saw them behave like this. Blauer, oh, perhaps it might be wise. It might be wise, I mean to say, perhaps we should show our friendly intentions.
Slowly, Blower drops to his knees, and then with some effort to his hands and knees, in imitation of the natives. After a moment, he turns his head up from the mud and looks at the others standing above him.
What are you doing? You see what I'm doing? Come on, get down,
Slowly,
get down!
Stitzer drops to his knees, looking at Blower.
Get down!
Merce and Butz, almost together, drop down on the ground and put their faces in the mud. The natives don't look up. They are motionless.
Not me. He'll make them angry. He'll ruin everything.
Snitzer makes a move for his gun.
No, not yet.
Pan back up, showing temple and lake, and taking in De Tirpitz.
Coming! Marlowe!
De Tirpitz struggling with a canoe, panning away from De Tirpitz, down onto the water of the lake. The water moves past camera as Marlowe paddles towards the temple. De Tirpitz on shore, moving across water of the lake to the temple, which, supported by numerous pilings, towers black and ominous above the lake. He finally comes close to the ladder, which extends up to the floor of temple. Now Marlowe is climbing the ladder. We catch in the background the texture of the water and light, as well as the pattern of the pilings under the temple. The temple ceiling showing it is covered with skulls. Interior, temple, moonlight. Pan down from a skull-covered ceiling to a view of the temple. The skull and bone decoration is carried throughout the interior. The place is dark, the source of light coming from the moon, which shines in through the open front. At the far end of the structure, we discern a throne on a platform, and seated on the throne, the figure of a man. Kurtz. Marlowe starts walking towards the throne. The voice of De Tirpitz is heard, calling from the extreme distance.
Kurtz! Kurtz!
Kurtz raises his eyes a little from the lens and looks past Marlowe's shoulder toward the front of the temple.
Who's that? De Tirpitz.
Kurtz looks back into Marlowe's eyes, inquiringly.
He must learn to pray. How many more of them? 6, counting me.
Kurtz is still not looking at Marlowe, but is now searching the distances behind him.
I'm not counting you. You'd never understand. 5. I knew that in my infinite wisdom. Kurtz.
Kurtz!
1,000 to 1. 1,000 to me. Or is it more? How many have you got there?
Again, Kurtz shifts his look away from Marlowe's eyes.
From the river to the mountains, all the people are united. And all you have to do is say the word, eh?
Kurtz!
Oh, you're going to eat us? The superior races are not very palatable.
Now, from across the lake, a cry goes up, a savage cry, an incantation. This is followed by an enormous swell of mournful voices, a sort of huge, barbaric choral effect. Kurtz looks up at this.
They're praying to me. I have a gun. You won't leave this place alive.
Kurtz has risen. Above him, we see part of the skull-covered rear wall.
I'll leave this place.
He is standing on the platform before the throne, looking out past Marlowe, past the lake, to the multitude beyond. The choral effect grows in volume.
I have another world to conquer. What world? Down the river, 5 more continents, and then I'll die.
Singing stops.
Civilization. Is that all you want? I want everything.
At this, Kurt steps down from the platform. He starts walking toward the front of the temple. Outside the lake, and natives gathered on the shore. Just as Kurtz achieves the opening, Marlowe speaks.
What are you going to do?
Kurtz lurches, almost collapsing, and clings to one of the heavy posts that supports the roof. Disturbed by the sudden movement of Kurtz, bats appear from the rafters and fly out through the opening. Kurtz turns and looks at Marlowe.
I'm answering a prayer.
More bats fly through the scene.
Oh, my angel.
From the distant shore, there is now heard a low, weirdly harmonized wail from the native horde, which has risen on its knees and now falls back into its original praying position. The company men clumsily follow the natives' action. Kurtz gives a short laugh.
There's Blauer and Stitzer and Merce. They're praying, too. There comes one of them in a canoe. The Tippets. Sacrilege. Is the lake supposed to be holy? The Holy of Holies. Where you stand is taboo, the place of the Most High. Are you the pilot of the riverboat? Yes. Well, that's a pity. I had plans for you.
The sound of the Tirpitz paddling in the water can now be heard and becomes louder as the scene progresses. Kurtz looks down to him again.
These blasphemies must be stopped. With guns or arrows. Arrows with steel tips? Yes. Kurtz!
The Tirpitz's voice is now much closer, and he is almost below the temple.
Speak English. I want Marlowe to understand. If you ever can, Marlowe. The Tirpitz. I can't see you. I'm not always visible.
Kurtz is looking down into the lake, and it's difficult to tell whether he is smiling.
You're crazy!
At this, there is a low sighing of 1,000 voices from the shore, wipe across back of Kurtz's head to take in a shot of the horde as the crowd rises to its feet and presses forward to the margins of the lake. Kurtz remains up close.
You're lucky the tribes don't speak English. Do you threaten me? Yes! Oh, you're a brave man. Come up here. I'll come up and kill you!
Kurtz calls in a dialect to the native on the shore. He is answered from the other side of the lake by a great shout. The natives crowd nearer and nearer to the water, bearing out toward the temple, gesticulating, and their headsman calling out in answer to Kurtz. Kurtz starts his grand oration. After he has spoken a sentence or two, he pauses to allow his words to be interpreted. They echo Kurtz's voice in different dialects for the benefit of all the tribes. Great excitement is shown among the natives as Kurtz finishes. Kurtz starts blocking out the view behind him.
Kurtz!
Kurtz turns away, and we see the Tirpitz beyond, straightening up from his climb up the ladder onto the temple floor. He is holding a gun, and as he approaches Kurtz, Kurtz shouts, not in terror, but as though it were a sort of symbolic or ritualistic completion.
Kurtz shouts to the natives in jargon.
There is an answering movement, and a great shout from the natives. They fall on their faces again. Kurtz looks out at them as this happens, then looks quickly back to the Tirpitz.
The Tirpitz, my beloved son, in whom I am well pleased.
The Tirpitz looks back down the temple. At the same time, Kurtz moves towards the camera so that his head and shoulders fill the screen.
What do you see? We were attacked on the river. I called it off. Their natural passions can't be controlled.
Natural? They know you've come for me, to take me away from them. They love me. Do you understand that? They're afraid of you. You must have told them we were evil spirits. Do you know what it is to command souls? Greatness. Can't you see what I mean to them? Get up on that throne. I'm going back down the river. I've got history to write. I'm just beginning. Get up on that throne.
Here, more with his gesture than by any apparent effort, Kurtz knocks the gun out of de Turpit's hand. It clatters on the wooden floor of the temple.
Get up on that throne.
Slowly, de Turpit starts to back away from Kurtz, toward the throne at the other end of the temple.
Get up on that throne. It is yours now. I leave it to you. The power and the glory. It is yours.
De Turpitz continues walking to the throne.
The first real dictatorship.
Now Kurtz turns his head to the entrance of the temple and yells past camera to the natives on the shore. There is an echoing, answering yell. Kurtz turns back to speak to de Turpitz, who by now is seated on the throne in an attitude which expresses misery and failure at the hands of Kurtz.
How does it feel? Are you comfortable in the seat of heaven?
He gives a short, ironic laugh, and then looks down to the floor and kicks the gun, which he had knocked out of de Turpitz's hand, across the floor toward the side ledge of the temple. Marlowe watches the gun progress across the floor, sail out over the edge, and drop into the lake below, breaking the surface of the water. And as the ripples quieten down, the reflection of the full moon becomes perfect, almost filling the frame.
Look. Look. Is that the moon down there below us?
Over the reflection of the moon, we superimpose Kurtz's face, dissolve into the moon, apparently seen in the water. But as it pulls back, we see that it is the moon in the sky itself. Exterior shore beside lake, night, fog. Kurtz walks into the scene from behind and to the left of the camera. When his head and shoulders register in the composition, he stops. Beyond him, to his right and below, are the figures of the company men. One by one, they raise their heads and look up at him. Then Blauer, with some hesitancy, rises to his feet. He is followed by Stitzer, Butz, and Moos. Kurtz walks slowly up to Blauer.
Mr. Kurtz, you remember Mr. Stutzer? We were most concerned, Mr. Kurtz.
As they speak,
We rejoice
the
that we have
men are
managed to...
absolutely appalled by Kurtz's look, which is penetrating, but strangely vague and impossible to understand.
We rejoice that we've managed to...
Kurtz has raised his hand to Stitzer's throat.
To find you...
Kurtz has turned away from him and is now moving slowly past Moos.
How do you do, Mr. Kurtz? Remember me? Your old assistant? Oh, no, you don't remember me, I'm sure, Mr. Kurtz. My name is Butz.
In the appalled silence, Kurtz looks over and then turns and starts away from them. The men stare after his retreating figure, and suddenly, Kurtz turns around and sticks out his tongue at them. And wheeling, he starts to run. The crouching natives don't even look up. They watch this with their eyes. Kurtz plunges amongst them wildly and finally falls on top of them. Kurtz struggles across the bodies, but the men bear down on him. They have him by his arms and legs and are lifting him off the bodies across which he was sprawled.
Kurtz is seen on the litter being raised up to the shoulders of a crew of natives. Company men are present on the scene giving orders. There is no dialogue, only music. As the litter is raised, the natives all get to their feet. Through their number, there now appears a native woman who breaks her way through them until she comes up to Kurtz. Kurtz turns his head slowly to her and looks at her, full in the face. An expression of psychic hangover, of exhausted lust, cosmic disgust. Kurtz looks away from her and is carried forward. Exterior, swamp, night, fog. Long shot of the little plateau and the procession. A fire is being built, ivory is being piled up, and Kurtz on his litter is carried up on the plateau and set down. He is staring into the fire. After a moment, he lowers his eyelids. There is a pause. In the distance can be heard the throbbing of drums.
Do you think he's asleep?
Pan away from Kurtz's right to where Blauer, Stitzer, and Mois are seated. Facing camera on the outside of the fire, the drums are louder. Blauer looks out into the night, over and beyond camera.
How near are they?
I wonder how Mr. de Tirpitz is making back there.
There will be no difficulty with the boat?
I don't think so.
We can start the moment we get there.
Yes?
Good. If it wasn't for Kurtz, we'd be on our way now.
Mr. Kurtz is not very well. We must make every sacrifice.
As Marlowe looks over to Kurtz, one eye is half open, glittering in the firelight.
We must, of course, rush to help de Tirpitz when we get back. His position is not enviable. I would not care to be left alone up there to govern all those savages. But Mr. Kurtz insisted. He had to leave someone in his place. After all, he made himself a god to them. They made him a god. He subdued them to a great extent and brought many benefits, many. His methods were unusual, but the circumstances required forceful leadership. That's right, Mr. Sturzer. That is right. They made him a god, because even among the savages, the great leader is recognized, and his attributes are godlike. Oh, yes, Mr. Kurtz was a very great man.
During this, Moose has turned to look off toward Kurtz's chair.
Mr. Kurtz!
Pan finishes on Kurtz's chair,
Mr. Kurtz!
which is empty.
He's gone. Moose, you go that way. Marlowe, there. Everyone go a different way. Get him back. But be careful. Be careful. They mustn't hear us out there. If they know... Look!
Stitzer has circled around and now comes into view. His dim, vague little figure plunges across the mud towards Blauer. Moose is running even faster than Stitzer, rushes into scene and makes over towards Stitzer and Blauer.
Shh! Look here! Shh!
As Moose passes camera after them, following him across the field into the darkness towards the others, holding on his running figure, Moose is now caught up to the others.
The natives out there. They mustn't hear us.
Stitzer has been nearsightedly examining the ground.
Tracks! Fresh tracks! Yes, and they must be his. Come on!
Blauer trots out deeper into the darkness, followed by Stitzer and Moose.
Shh!
Stitzer is stumbling along, squinting at the earth beneath him as he runs. Blauer strains to see the tracks in the darkness below him.
He's
Through
crawling
the
on
thick
all
lenses
fours!
of his glasses, almost causes him to fall on his face. Moose drops a little behind.
If we run, we can head him off. We might get him in front of him. We are in front. What? Where are the tracks? There aren't any. If he gets back to those savages, we're finished. In his condition, there's no telling. Look! Where? Oh, no, I'm wrong. I thought I saw something stir there in the mud. Oh, my nerves. I'm not well. Mr. Kurtz!
Moose starts off into the darkness, running past camera. Stitzer, Blauer start after him. Moose stops some 10 or 15 yards away and stands over Kurtz, crouching in the mud.
Mr. Kurtz! Mr. Kurtz!
Close-up of Kurtz on his hands and knees. His head is bowed. He looks beaten. The men standing around him are looking down at him. Behind this can be seen the distant flickering of the campfire.
Well, Mr. Kurtz, don't you think it'd be better if you let us take you back to the stretcher, Mr. Kurtz? Where you can rest?
Slowly, Kurtz raises his head and looks up into Marlowe's face.
I was on the threshold of great things.
Music takes over, and the company men kneel and start to lift Kurtz to his feet.
Exterior riverboat. Dawn. The company men are at the window, looking out. Blauer. What is it? The Moose. They're on a pole. See? They're holding it up. Marlowe. What are you talking about? Moose. It's Mr. de Tippets. They've cut off his head. They've got it on a pole. Stitzer, let them have it.
The company men start to shoot out the window. They raise their guns and empty them in a steady volley at the unseen natives. The smoke from the gunfire is rapidly filling the river. Natives have already fallen. More have fallen as the men empty lead into them. There is terrible confusion. Light is seen flaring very distantly in the darkening sky behind us. Pan around in pilot house and center on Kurtz as the expression on Kurtz's face registers. Moving shot of the river, seen from one of the front windows of pilot house, taking in portion of the river and portion of the jungle growth along its bank.
The brown current ran swiftly out of the heart of darkness, bearing us down towards the sea. And Kurtz's life was running swiftly too, ebbing out of his heart into the sea of inexorable time.
A flash of lightning illuminates the scene, dissolves, showing the start of the jungle fire, its quick progress through the dry rot of the jungle. Dissolves, showing the boat continuing down the river, the jungle blazing all around. Pull back, taking in the frame of the pilot house window and picking up Marlowe's reflection in the window. Pan as Marlowe turns from the wheel to a medium close shot of Kurtz, who is lying on the litter at the rear of the pilot house. The windows are covered with rattan shutters, through which the jungle fire flickers. The oil lamp is lit.
Do you know why I ran away? I came down the river as number 3 and turned back. Last night you caught me crawling back to the jungle. Do you know why? I'm entirely sane, Marlowe. Lunatics are sane before they die. I'm going to die tonight. Marlowe, do you know you're going to die? But there's someone you must live for.
Fire glows through the shutters.
The light. The light. Shut out the light. There's Elsa. Elsa. My intended. Close the shutters. The shutters are closed. The light. Elsa, you must explain everything. I can't. I want no more than justice. She loves me, Marlowe. You know, you're a little like me. I thought of leaving you in my place in the temple instead of that fool. What was his name?
The Tippets. Well, why not go down the river instead of me? Why not take my place there with Elsa? Well, you should appeal to her. You're in love with her, aren't you? Aren't you? Why don't you marry her? The light! Shut out the light!
After a pause, Marlowe sits down beside him.
Oh, you came a long way for me, Marlowe, a long way. Long, hard way. It was a good hunt, and you caught me alive, but I'm cheating them. Yes, I'm cheating them, because I am going to die a martyr. I'm going to be a martyr. I'm going to die. You? A martyr? Oh, yes, yes. I'm more than a hero already. Not to you, of course. To my people. Your people back there? My race. The superior race. For then I'm more than a god. I'm every one of them. Think of it, Marlowe. Think of it. I am a whole nation's long golden dream. And to you, a miserable wretch you once caught grubbing for ivory in the bush, crazy with disease, who died on you in captivity. Now, you're more than that. Or less. Or worse. Or worse. How do you know you're going to die? What I've had is fatal. It's called power. Do you understand that? I think so. You said I never would. No. You'll never understand, Kurtz. The statue in the public park. And there'll be one. Big one. Very bad taste. And on this day, every year, they make speeches and lay wreaths at my stone feet, and then the young men will go off and get drunk singing a song about me. No. No, you'll never understand that. Not what they make of me. But you can see what I've made of myself. You said you ran away. I don't understand that. I was afraid. Understand this much. Everything I've done up here, everything has been according to the method of my government. Everything. There's a man now. A man in Europe, trying to do what I've done in the jungle. He will fail. It is his madness. He thinks he can't fail. But he will. A brute can rule only brutes. Remember the meek. The meek. I'm a great man, Marlowe. Really, really great. Greater than great men before me. I know the strength of the enemy. Its terrible weakness. The meek. You and the rest of the millions. Poor in spirit. I hate you. But I know you for my betters. Without knowing why you are, except that yours is the kingdom of heaven, except that you shall inherit the earth. Oh, don't mistake me. I haven't gone moral on my deathbed. I'm above morality. No, I've climbed higher than other great men, and have seen further. I am the first absolute dictator, the first complete success. I've known what the others tried to get. I've gotten it in the one place in the world where it could be got. I'm the man on top. The one man. All the rest is 6 feet underground where I buried them. That's the game. Bury the rest of them alive. Stay on top yourself. I won the game. But the winner loses too.
There is a flash of lightning, followed by a clap of thunder.
That's why I ran away. I ran from the face of darkness, and then as I started back down to the river, I saw that there was darkness there too, and failure. And so I hid in the charnel house, where you found me, and then again, I ran again, and madness, much better than defeat. Much. Down the river is the light of reason, showing still behind the darkness, marking the evil, marking the shape of the original lie. Oh, I sound moral again. I'm not. I'm just practical. I know when to die.
Lightning and thunder.
I thought the time had come for me. The sun was low over the world and my shadow was long. It would cover everything. I know now. It's not long enough. No man's is long enough. The strong die with their dream, but I am the first to die awake. Our shadows are dark like the night, and where they fall, the jungle grows again. But the sun always goes down. My did. And the world has a darker shadow, darker than mine. I'm going to die before daybreak. I'm afraid to live, because the dawn might find me a very little man.
Kurtz has lifted his gaze. Now he is staring not toward camera lens, but beyond it, his eyes very wide.
Marlowe. Kurtz. Kurtz.
Lightning and thunder.
Kurtz. What are you looking at? The horror. The horror. Kurt's face freezes in an expression of terror. There's a flash of lightning and then a clap of thunder and a sudden violent tropic rain hits outside with a terrific and stunning impact. The pilot house sways beneath it. It's a real squall which quenches the raging jungle fire. Wind, which has risen now, swells into a shriek and rips the little rattan shutters from the windows. The rain pours in, pan down to take in Kurtz's face, and the rain driving down on it. And then the oil lamp was ripped from the ceiling, knocking out the light. The room is plunged into semi-darkness. Pan back to Kurtz. Blinding flash of lightning shows that his face is wet from the rain, which pours down from the open windows. Marlowe rises and he turns to walk out the door. Another flash of lightning illuminates the jungle. The trees are rocked from the impact of the rain and the wind, and the smoke from the quenched fire steams up in the jungle, and the rain drives down the deck, drives and across the little boat. Leaves, vines, and other fragments of the jungle, torn out by the wind, sweep across the frame. Exterior riverboat, interior cabin, night. Camera moves forward and through doorway of the cabin, out of the rain, and into the room, where the company men are all gathered under a little oil lamp hanging from the ceiling. It is swinging violently. Its light is very bright, and the room is filled with tobacco smoke. Silence. The door opens. A member of the native crew stands in the doorway, his eyes white in the glare of the lamp. The storm behind him. Native, very slowly. Mr. Kurtz, he dead.
Another flash of lightning, illuminating the thrashing jungle behind him, then thunder, as the company men spring to their feet and rush out the door. Music takes over from thunder. Riverboat and river night. On the soundtrack, we hear faintly over music the voice of Blauer speaking the same burial service as Elsa spoke during Melcher's burial. The company men carry Kurtz's body, sewed up in a sack, and they heave the body into the river. The body is lost from view in a big splash. As this happens, there is lightning again, lighting the jungle.
They buried something in the river. And then they nearly buried me. I nearly died of fever myself. I nearly said my own last words there on the river, and I found that probably I have nothing to say, but, well, Kurtz, he had something to say. He summed it up. He judged the horror. true, he died and I lived. Maybe that's the whole difference. Maybe all the wisdom and all the truth are just compressed into that moment of time at which we step over the threshold of the invisible.
Long shot of the boat, looking very small. As it moves down the river in the steady rain, following the boat, it picks up the bluff and the settlement of Station 1. As the boat moves into the mouth of the river and makes over to the little dock.
I saw him again, months later. At the foot of the river, I saw him with Elsa. I saw those wide eyes, that immense stare, condemning, loathing, and the whole universe, piercing enough to penetrate all the hearts that beat in that darkness.
Imposed on this is the image of Kurtz's procession, ivory bearers and Kurtz himself, borne on the litter, in absolute silhouette. The shadows of the procession become almost indistinguishable. The serpentine length of the river glittering dimly in the darkness, the outlines of the room are seen through it. Pan up the grotesque outlines of the jungle trees rising above the river, making on the frame a queer, misty composition of trees, the moving figures of the procession, and behind all of this, the texture of corrugated iron and the sharp angles which are the walls of the dining hall. Into the music has crept the suggestion of drums.
Yes, he lived then before me. The vision entered the house with me, the stretcher, the phantom bearer, the wild crowd of worshippers, the gloom of the forest, the glitters of the reach between the murky bends, the beat of the drums, regular, muffled like the beating of a heart. The heart of a conquering darkness.
The barely discernible image of the jungle procession has now faded out of the aperture, and in its place there fades into our perception the dimmest possible suggestion of the campfire, seen from a great distance. Outlined against this is the silhouette of Kurtz, who moves directly toward camera until his black shadow fills the aperture.
And the memory of what I'd heard him say afar there, with the horn shapes stirring at my back and the glow of fires within the patient woods, those words came back to me.
The voice of Kurtz is heard now very close to us, but at the same time, queerly dim.
I want no more than justice.
The door in the far corner of the room open now, throwing a dim angled pattern of light across the corrugated iron wall at the back, seen through the silhouette of Kurtz. This washes out the last impression of the jungle and the campfires. But the silhouette of Kurtz's head remains, though more faintly. Elsa comes out of the door and stops there, looking toward camera. As she speaks, there sneaks in on the soundtrack very, very faintly the love strains of music, light and exotic.
Mr. Marlowe? Marlowe, why don't you take my place? I saw them in the same instant of time, his death and her sorrow. I saw them together, heard them together.
Elsa at the back of the room has struck a match and lit a small lamp. Vignette appears. She carries the lamp with her as she moves toward camera until, as she speaks, the light of the lamp showing her face and rendering the silhouette of Kurtz very pale, so that as she moves in, it almost vanishes from the screen, and only its outlines can be made out, framing her face. The shadow of Kurtz's eyes, which gleam luminously into the lens.
You were with him when he died? The horror. The horror.
After Kurtz's voice is heard, the last indication of his silhouette dims off the screen, And as the sound of his voice fades away, his eyes glow out and disappear like dying coals. At the sound of his voice, the tiny murmur of the waltz is no more.
You knew him well. Well, I knew him as well as it's possible for one man to know another.
The music is out at the time the narration completes. The voice of Kurtz is heard in the silence.
The horror.
The horror.
You knew, or you know, what vast plans he had. Something must remain. His words, at least, have not died. His words will remain. He died as he lived. His end was every way worthy of his life. And I was not with him. Everything that could be done. But I believed in him. More than anyone on earth. More than his own mother. More than himself. He needed me. Forgive me. I have mourned so long in silence. You were with him? To the last? To the very end. I heard his very last words. Repeat them. I want something. Something to live with.
The voice of Kurtz is heard again, still very dimly, repeating over and over again his last words. The horror.
The horror. The dusk was repeating them around us like the first whisper of a rising wind.
The horror.
The horror. His last word to live with. Don't you understand? The last word. I loved him. His last words, and the last word that he pronounced was, your name. I knew it. I was sure. Elsa's eyes are filled with tears, but her mouth smiles. She looks above and beyond the lens of the camera, and the music takes over. Dissolve out. Interior, settlement, hill and harbor. Dissolve in whilst moving back from the dining hall, hold on the lighted doorway, moving back through the gate, down the hall, and back across the harbor in the exact reversal of the procedure at the commencement of the story. The light rain is falling. The harbor is partly shrouded with the mist. The light from the dining hall, however, can be seen for some time as we move out. We move out to the ocean. The dark country is now only a blur on the horizon. A blur without definition. Marlowe's voice. She knew. She was sure. It seemed that the heavens would fall upon my head. But the heavens don't fall for such a trifle. I mean, would they have fallen, I wonder, if I had rendered Kurtz the justice which was his due? Exterior New York Harbor. Marlowe. Night. Marlowe's boat. He's seated in the boat. He strikes a match to light his pipe so that the first appearance of his dissolve is the dim flare of his match. Marlowe looks into the camera lens, straight into the eyes of the audience. Should I have told her the truth? Now the voice of Kurtz is heard very faintly on the soundtrack. I want only justice. Justice. The image of the dark country has disappeared from the frame, and Marlowe occupies it alone. His eyes look out of the lens, as though he saw beyond to Kurtz. The match is still in his hands, its light still showing on his face. See, I couldn't tell her. It would have been too dark. too dark altogether. We lost the first of the ebb. Marlowe looks up, throws his match down in the water. Pan, we follow the match, it goes out, and now as Marlowe speaks on the soundtrack, the music starts sneaking up. Pan up over the water into the distant horizon where the last glow of the sun shows beyond the darkening clouds. Marlowe's voice. The offing is barred by a black cloud and the tranquil waterway leading to the uttermost ends of the earth flows somber under an overcast sky, a sky that seems to lead into the heart of an immense darkness.
Fade out. The end.